At 31, Mara Collins owned everything she had in 2 garbage bags and a rain-softened cardboard box. She stood on the sidewalk as her landlord changed the lock behind her. Through the thin apartment door came the scrape of metal, followed by a final click. The last place she had called home no longer belonged to her. "You had 3 months," the landlord said without meeting her eyes. "I can't keep waiting." Mara wanted to explain that the packaging plant had closed without warning. She wanted to mention the unanswered job applications and the nights she washed dishes until her hands cracked. But explanations did not pay rent. She lifted her bags and walked away. By evening, the temperature had fallen sharply. Mara found shelter in an all-night bus station and sat beneath a flickering light, keeping her belongings between her feet. Shortly after midnight, a security guard approached. "You can warm up," he said, "but you can't sleep here." Outside, the wind drove old newspapers across the pavement. One sheet caught against Mara's shoe. As she bent to remove it, a small advertisement near the bottom caught her attention. County Tax Forfeiture Auction. Abandoned Rural Parcels. Conditional Deeds. From $5, Mara almost laughed. $5 could not buy a proper meal, much less land. Still, the auction hall was only 4 blocks away. In her coat pocket, she had $7.38. The following morning, Mara entered the county building mainly to escape the cold. Farmers, contractors, and property dealers filled the room, studying photographs of condemned sheds and neglected fields. Then the auctioneer displayed Parcel 42. A collapsed windmill leaned over a field of dead grass. Half its blades were missing. Rust covered the metal wheel, and the wooden tower looked one hard storm away from falling. No road access, no utilities, and no warranty, the auctioneer announced. The buyer receives a conditional deed and must secure the structures within 90 days. Opening bid, $5. No one moved. A man near the front chuckled. "You'd have to pay me to take it." The auctioneer raised his hand to close the lot. Mara looked again at the windmill. Broken, unwanted, barely standing. It reminded her of herself. She raised her hand. $5. The room fell silent. The auctioneer stared at her. "Do you understand the conditions?" Mara looked down at her 2 bags, then back at the photograph. "Yes." The hammer struck. Sold. After the administrative fee was deferred under the county's rehabilitation program, Mara walked out with $2.38 and 90 days to prove the land could be saved. She still had no house, no car, and no idea how she would reach the property. But for the first time in months, she possessed a place the world had not yet ordered her to leave. Mara reached Parcel 42 2 days later. She had spent her last money on a bus ticket to the edge of the county, then walked nearly 6 miles along an unpaved road with her bags cutting into her hands. The property did not look like a new beginning. It looked like the end of something. The windmill stood in the middle of a wide field of dead grass, its tower leaning so far that Mara wondered how it had survived the previous winter. Several wooden supports had snapped, and the remaining blades groaned whenever the wind moved them. A rusted fence marked part of the boundary, though most of it had collapsed into the weeds. There was no house, no electricity, and no visible water source. The only shelter was a small equipment shed with half its roof missing. Mara pushed open the shed door. Dust rose around her. Inside, she found a broken chair, several empty feed sacks, and an old shovel with a cracked handle. It was almost nothing, but it had walls. She cleared a dry corner, spread her coat across the floor, and placed her cardboard box beneath her head. That night, the wind passed through every gap in the boards. Each time the windmill creaked, Mara opened her eyes, expecting the entire structure to collapse. At sunrise, she walked the property. The soil was pale and hard. Cracks ran across the ground like veins. Thorny weeds grew where crops might once have stood, and piles of twisted metal lay half-buried beneath the grass. Near the northern boundary, Mara noticed tire tracks. A pickup truck soon appeared on the dirt road. An older man stepped out and stared at her as though she had wandered into the wrong place. "You the one who bought this?" he asked. Mara nodded. "For $5? "Yes." He looked toward the windmill and shook his head. My father said that thing stopped working before I was born. No good well, no good soil, no road worth maintaining. 3 owners tried to make something of this place. All 3 left. Mara glanced across the field. Why was the windmill built here? The man shrugged. People built foolish things everywhere back then. Before leaving, he warned her not to sleep beneath the tower. One hard gust, he said, and it may come down on top of you. That afternoon, Mara began clearing debris from the shed. She repaired part of the roof with loose boards and covered the remaining holes with feed sacks. By evening, her hands were blistered and bleeding. She sat outside, eating the last crackers from her bag, while the setting sun turned the broken windmill black against the sky. Everyone saw a useless structure on worthless land. Mara saw the only place she had left. And until it proved otherwise, that was enough. 3 days after arriving at the property, Mara returned to the county office to collect the deed. The clerk behind the counter examined her identification, then looked at Mara's worn coat and dirt-stained hands. "You understand this sale is final?" she asked. Mara nodded. The clerk pushed a thick packet of papers across the desk. The $5 price had purchased the land, but it had not purchased safety. The county accepted no responsibility for the collapsed structures, buried debris, contaminated soil, or anything else that might be discovered on the property. Mara would also be responsible for clearing dangerous materials and securing the windmill before the next inspection. "How long do I have?" Mara asked. 90 days. "And if I can't do it?" "The county may condemn the site and take possession again." Mara stared at the documents. She had bought a place to escape eviction, only to learn that she could lose it before winter. The clerk pointed to another page. "There is one more condition. The northern boundary has never been properly surveyed. Until that is resolved, you cannot build a permanent house or sell any portion of the land." Mara signed anyway. When she returned to parcel 42, a red notice had been nailed to the equipment shed. "Unsafe structures. Entry at owner's risk." She pulled it down, folded it carefully, and placed it inside her cardboard box with the deed. That afternoon, Mara began making an inventory of everything that could be reused. Straight boards went into one pile. Rusted bolts, hinges, and wire went into another. She removed broken glass from the shed and filled holes in the walls with flattened pieces of metal. The windmill itself was a greater problem. Its eastern support had split near the base, and one of the upper beams had twisted loose. Mara could not repair it without tools, lumber, and help she did not have. She considered cutting the tower down. It would satisfy the county inspector and remove the greatest danger on the property. But each time she approached it with the old shovel and a borrowed handsaw, she noticed how deeply its 4 legs disappeared into the earth. The structure had not simply been placed on the ground. It had been anchored. Near the western leg, Mara found bolts larger than anything required for a simple farm windmill. Beneath the weeds were fragments of a stone foundation arranged in a near-perfect square. Someone had spent considerable time and money building it. That did not make sense. Why construct such a strong foundation on land with no reliable water? As evening approached, Mara pressed her ear against one of the hollow metal supports. At first, she heard only the wind. Then something shifted below. A faint metallic sound rose from somewhere beneath the ground. Not the creak of the tower. A chain, or perhaps a loose pipe. Mara stepped back and looked at the leaning windmill. For the first time, she wondered whether the county had sold her more than a ruin. Perhaps the $5 deed had also purchased a question no previous owner had managed to answer. The next morning, Mara returned to the western leg of the windmill with the cracked shovel. She cleared away the weeds and scraped several inches of soil from the stone foundation. What first looked like random rubble slowly revealed a deliberate pattern. The stones had been cut to similar sizes and arranged in a perfect square around the tower. At the center of each side, a narrow iron bar disappeared into the ground. Mara pulled on one. It did not move. She dug around it until the blade of her shovel struck something solid. The impact sent a sharp metallic vibration through the handle. Mara dropped to her knees and brushed away the dirt with her hands. Beneath the surface was a flat iron plate, nearly 3 feet wide. Its edges had been sealed with a dark, hardened substance that looked like tar. 4 bolts held it to the foundation, but the metal was so rusted that their original shape was difficult to recognize. This was not part of an ordinary windmill base. She worked for hours, widening the hole and removing stones one by one. By noon, she had uncovered a second iron bar running beneath the tower. It crossed the first at a precise angle, forming an arrow that pointed toward the southern edge of the foundation. Mara followed it. Near the leaning support, she found 3 stones marked with shallow cuts. The lines appeared meaningless until she poured water from her bottle over them. Numbers emerged beneath the dust. 12, 4, 38. Mara copied them onto the back of the county notice. They might have been measurements, a date, or nothing more than marks left by the builders. Yet the careful placement made coincidence difficult to believe. As she continued digging, the shovel struck another object. This time the sound was hollow. She removed the dirt and found a short metal pipe capped at the top. A length of chain was attached beneath the cap and descended into darkness. It was the same sound she had heard through the tower leg. Mara wrapped both hands around the cap and pulled. It lifted less than an inch before something below caught the chain. From deep underground came a dull knock, then another. 3 slow impacts, as though the chain were striking the side of a buried container. Mara froze. The farmer who had visited her claimed the land had no useful well. The county documents mentioned only structural debris. Nothing explained an iron plate, numbered stones, or a chain hidden beneath the foundation. She looked up at the broken windmill. Perhaps it had not been built merely to draw water. Perhaps it had been built to conceal whatever lay below it. The older man in the pickup returned the following afternoon. He found Mara beside the windmill, studying the numbers she had copied from the marked stones. "You're still here," he said. Mara held up the county notice. "Does this mean anything to you?" The man stopped when he saw the numbers. 12, 4, 38. For several seconds he stared at them without speaking. "My name is Elias Ward," he finally said. "My family owned the land east of here. When I was a boy, this property belonged to a man named Silas Bell." Elias sat on a fallen beam. Silas repaired pumps and surveyed wells for ranchers. People said he could read dry land better than most men could read a map. "Then why did his windmill stop working?" Mara asked. "That was the strange part. It didn't fail." According to Elias, the windmill operated normally during its first year. Then Silas removed part of the pumping mechanism, sealed the opening beneath the tower, and began digging around the foundation after dark. Lantern light sometimes burned beside the windmill until sunrise. When neighbors asked what he was doing, Silas always gave the same answer. "The important part isn't above the ground." Rumors spread that he had found silver, but Elias's father believed Silas had discovered water moving beneath the dry fields. "He started measuring every well in the area," Elias said. "Then a drilling company began buying land north of here. The company planned to install a high-capacity commercial well. Silas warned that heavy pumping could drain the shallow underground channel supplying nearby family farms. No one listened. The county records showed only dry soil and an unreliable well. Company representatives dismissed Silas's measurements as guesswork. Then unpaid taxes forced the property into foreclosure. The night before he left," Elias continued, "my father saw him beneath the windmill. Silas was lowering a metal box into the ground. He covered it with oilcloth and sealed the foundation before morning." "Where did he go?" Mara asked. "West, according to the last letter my father received. He said he no longer owned the land, but someday someone might understand what he had protected." Elias looked at the numbers again. December 4th, 1938. That was the date Silas purchased the property. Mara glanced toward the buried chain. So the marks weren't showing where treasure was hidden. "No," Elias said. "They were showing when his work began." Before leaving, he looked across the dead field. Silas used to say this land had been judged by people who only studied the surface. The pickup disappeared down the dirt road. Mara remained beside the windmill, holding the paper in one hand and the buried chain in the other. Whatever Silas had concealed below was not the secret of a vanished man. It was the unfinished work of a man no one had believed. Mara waited until morning before touching the chain again. Using the old shovel, she widened the opening around the capped pipe. Beneath the iron plate, she discovered a narrow brick-lined shaft descending into the ground. It was too small for a person to enter, but wide enough for the buried object Elias had described. Mara tied the chain around a wooden beam and used a rusted pulley from the shed to create leverage. The first pull produced nothing. On the second, the chain tightened with a violent snap. By the fifth attempt, something heavy scraped against the walls below. Mara pulled until her shoulders burned. Inch by inch, a rectangular metal box rose through the shaft. Its surface was covered in rust, and black oilcloth had been wrapped around its lid. When the box finally reached the surface, Mara collapsed beside it, breathing hard. There was no lock, only a corroded latch sealed with wax. She hesitated before breaking it. For years, people had imagined that Silas Bell had buried silver, stolen equipment, or money. Mara had almost begun believing the same thing. The lid opened with a deep metallic groan. Inside, she found no coins or jewelry. The box contained several rolled maps, 3 notebooks, a brass compass, glass tubes marked with measurements, and a small handheld device with a spinning needle. Beneath them lay bundles of letters protected by oilcloth. One map showed Parcel 42 and the surrounding farms. Blue lines crossed beneath the property, but they did not match any streams visible above ground. Another sheet contained circles drawn around the windmill. Beside them, Silas had written, "The surface lies during drought. Follow the stone, not the grass." Mara opened the first notebook. The early pages recorded rainfall, wind direction, soil temperature, and the depth of nearby wells. Later entries described underground layers of clay, gravel, and limestone. Silas had not been digging for treasure. He had been studying water. On the final page, Mara found a rough drawing of the windmill connected to several buried pipes. One line extended far beyond the tower toward the northern boundary. At the bottom was a warning: "Do not open the lower chamber until the pressure is released." Mara looked toward the pipe and chain beside her. The box was not the secret. It was an instruction manual. And whatever Silas had buried deeper beneath the windmill was still waiting to be opened. Mara spent the next 2 days studying Silas Bell's notebooks. The drawings were rough, but one detail appeared repeatedly. The windmill had never been designed to draw water from a single vertical well. It was connected to a network of buried pipes that collected water from several underground layers. Silas believed the field sat above an ancient creek bed. During long droughts, the surface became dry and lifeless, yet water still moved slowly through gravel beneath the clay. Ordinary wells missed it because they drilled straight down in the wrong places. The windmill had served a different purpose. Its turning blades powered a small pressure pump. Instead of lifting water directly, the mechanism pulled moisture from the buried gravel channels and pushed it into a sealed storage chamber beneath the tower. Mara followed the map toward the northern boundary. After hours of searching, she found a shallow depression hidden beneath thorn bushes. The soil there was darker than the rest of the field. Smooth stones lay beneath the surface, rounded as if water had once passed over them. Silas's note returned to her: "Follow the stone, not the grass." Mara dug beside the depression and uncovered a narrow clay pipe. Though cracked in several places, it pointed directly toward the windmill. The blue lines on the map were not imaginary streams. They were underground collection channels. That evening, Mara examined the lower chamber warning again. According to Silas's instructions, pressure had to be released through a small valve before the main plate could be opened. Otherwise, trapped air and water could force the cover upward without warning. She searched the foundation until she found a brass fitting beneath layers of hardened tar. Using an old wrench borrowed from Elias, she turned it slowly. At first, nothing happened. Then a faint hiss escaped from the valve. The sound continued for nearly a minute. A cool mist touched Mara's fingers. She stared at the droplets forming on the metal. There was still moisture below. The next morning, Elias returned. Mara showed him the pipe, the maps, and the wet valve. He read several pages in silence. Silas wasn't searching for water, Mara said. He had already found it. Elias looked toward the dead field. Then why did he bury the system? Mara opened one of the letters from the box. It was addressed to the county land office but had never been sent. In it, Silas warned that nearby commercial drilling could drain the underground channel. He had hidden the chamber to keep its location from speculators who wanted to buy the surrounding farms cheaply. The treasure beneath the windmill was not gold. It was a forgotten water system, and proof that the worthless land had never truly been dry. Mara spent 3 days rebuilding the windmill's damaged mechanism. Elias brought spare bolts, an old length of pipe, and a hand pump from his barn. Together, they replaced the broken shaft and connected it to the buried system described in Silas's notebook. By late afternoon, the repaired blades began turning in the wind. At first, nothing happened. Then the pipes beneath the ground trembled. A deep knocking sound traveled through the foundation, followed by a thin stream of brown water from the outlet beside the shed. Mara smiled, but the flow stopped within seconds. The windmill groaned violently. One of the pipes burst near the northern depression, spraying mud across the dead grass. Beneath the tower, pressure forced dirty water back through the release valve. "Shut it down!" Elias shouted. Mara grabbed the brake rope. The wheel slowed, but a wooden support split under the strain. One blade broke loose and crashed into the field. Silence returned. The repaired windmill leaned more dangerously than before. They inspected the system and found the problem. Decades of clay, roots, and mineral deposits had blocked the underground channels. The pump had not drawn water toward the chamber. It had forced pressure against sealed pipes. They had come close to destroying the entire network. The following morning, 2 neighboring farmers arrived after hearing about the accident. They stared at the broken blade and the pool of mud around the tower. "So that's the famous hidden water?" one of them laughed. The other shook his head. "You bought a $5 ruin and found $5 worth of mud." After they left, Mara sat beside the damaged pipe. She had used nearly every reusable part on the property. The county inspection was approaching, and the windmill was now less stable than before. For the first time, she considered abandoning the land. Then she noticed something beneath the muddy water. Small bubbles were rising steadily through the soil. Mara pressed her hand against the ground. It was cold. The system had failed, but something below it was still moving. The bubbles gave Mara a new idea. Instead of forcing water through the blocked pipes, she opened the broken section near the northern depression and began clearing it by hand. Elias helped her remove roots, clay, and pale mineral deposits packed inside the old channel. They worked slowly, cleaning only a few feet each day. Silas's notebooks warned that the underground creek moved gently. The system had never depended on great pressure. It depended on patience. Mara rebuilt the pump using a smaller piston and reduced the windmill's speed. She also dug a shallow basin beside the shed so any water that reached the surface would not disappear into the cracked soil. On the 4th morning, the wind began to rise. The repaired wheel turned with a low, uneven rhythm. One rotation, then another. The buried pipes trembled, but this time there was no violent knocking. A soft gurgling sound came from beneath the foundation. Mara and Elias stood beside the outlet, waiting. At first, only air escaped. Then, a thin ribbon of muddy water appeared. It continued longer than before. The stream gradually cleared, changing from brown to pale gray, then almost transparent. It filled the bottom of the basin and continued flowing. Mara knelt and touched it. The water was cold, real water. Not rain trapped near the surface, not mud pushed from a broken pipe, water drawn from the gravel channel Silas had mapped decades earlier. Elias removed his hat. "He was right," he whispered. Over the next week, the basin filled each morning. Mara used the water carefully, first on a small patch of soil near the shed. She mixed dry grass and rotted wood into the ground, then planted beans and squash from seeds Elias gave her. Within days, the dust stopped blowing from that patch. green shoots appeared. News traveled through the county. The same neighbors who had laughed now came to inspect the outlet. Some still called it temporary, but during the next dry spell, the water continued to flow. Mara began sharing the excess with two nearby farms whose shallow wells had failed. She asked for no money, only spare lumber, pipe, and help stabilizing the tower. By the time the county inspector arrived, the windmill was standing straighter than it had in years. Behind it, a narrow strip of green crossed the field. The inspector stared at the flowing outlet, then at the $5 deed in Mara's hands. The land everyone had called worthless was beginning to prove them wrong. But Silas's final map suggested the water beneath the windmill was only part of what he had protected. 3 weeks after the water returned, Mara received her first serious offer for the land. A regional agricultural company wanted to purchase Parcel 42 and several neighboring farms. Their representative arrived in a polished truck, carrying survey maps and a contract worth more money than Mara had ever seen. He said the company planned to drill a commercial well. "You paid $5, he reminded her. "This offer could change your life." For a moment, Mara imagined accepting it. She could rent an apartment, buy a car, and never sleep beneath a leaking roof again. But the final map from Silas's box showed something the company's survey did not. The underground gravel channel extended beneath several family farms before reaching the windmill. Heavy pumping from one location could reduce the water available to everyone else. Silas had not hidden the system to make one person wealthy. He had hidden it to prevent one person from owning the water. Mara refused the offer. The company representative warned that the county might still approve drilling on nearby land. So Mara brought Silas's maps, notebooks, and unsent letters to a public hearing. The room was filled with farmers, officials, and people who had once laughed at her $5 purchase. Mara did not speak like an expert. She simply explained what the windmill had revealed. The dry fields were connected beneath the surface, and taking too much water from one place could harm every farm along the buried channel. Elias confirmed the history of the property. The county inspector presented photographs of the restored system. Two neighboring farmers testified that Mara's water had saved their livestock during the dry spell. The drilling permit was postponed pending a full groundwater study. Months later, the county recognized the old channel as a shared rural water resource. The surrounding farmers formed a small cooperative to maintain the windmill, monitor usage, and repair the buried collection lines. Parcel 42 was reappraised at a value hundreds of times greater than Mara's purchase price. She still refused to sell. Using donated lumber, she rebuilt the equipment shed into a small home. The first vegetables from her garden appeared beside the restored tower, and the field that had once looked dead slowly began turning green. One evening, Elias gave her the final envelope from Silas's box. It had been stuck beneath the lining and contained only a single sentence. "If the windmill turns again, let the water belong to those who keep the land alive." Mara stood beneath the moving blades and listened to water flowing into the basin. Silas Bell had not buried gold beneath the windmill. He had buried maps, measurements, and a truth others had failed to recognize. The land had never been worthless. People had simply stopped looking beneath the surface. And Mara, the woman who had arrived with nowhere left to go, had become the person who finally understood what it was worth.